The haters are revelatory to me because not only are they, funny and, frankly, pretty ignorant, but they say what is in a lot of our heads. You're wasting time. You're wasting materials. Why are you even doing this? There's no money in the arts. You can't make a living. There's a bathroom to be cleaned somewhere. There's a kid to be fed. There's so many more things that are so practical or doesn't generate anything for the world. I mean, those are some of the voices that happen.
I'm Katie.
I'm Anna.
She's a psychotherapist.
And she runs a photography empire. Together we make music and we podcast
to encourage ourselves
and you
to do the things that scare us most.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I am an artist. I live in the Twin Cities and I do a lot of different things, but something that got kind of big for me in the last few years is doing video recording, like time-lapse video of my art process. And so the internet sort of discovered me. So that was quite exciting.
That is exciting.
That's so cool. Tell us more about that. Was that just something that happened overnight unexpectedly, or what was that like?
Yeah. So I'd been an artist my whole life. My dad's an artist. He's a painter. And I decided in my teens that was the route for me to be a visual artist. And I went to college, a 4-year degree for art, and then I went to grad school for, getting an MFA. And I was doing all the things that you're supposed to do, like working, making a lot of art, getting the education, exhibiting, applying for shows and grants, teaching, selling art. And it was going great. It was especially in my 20s and early 30s, it was wonderful. And it was pretty, bohemian, my lifestyle. And then I married a little bit later in life and I got pregnant right away with my daughter, Gigi. And we decided to try for another one. And then the wheels pretty much fell off the bus. And I had multiple pregnancy losses, including a full-term stillbirth, our Esther, in 2015. And during that time, I was also raising a toddler, and I was being introduced to hormones in a new way that I was not familiar with. It's, pretty epic. And then I had, trauma and grief and hope and fear. I mean, it was a crazy emotional soup. And congruently with that, and I'm sure it's all connected, but congruently, I was not feeling like the career side of my art life was going that hot. Like I didn't really feel like I was finding my audience. I felt like I was trying to bark up this tree that just wasn't a fit for me. And I'd put, most of my professional life towards those goals of being an artist, a professional artist, but it just didn't feel like it was happening for me. And so, there's a lot of crossover between creating a human life and creating a work of art. And so those two things I'm sure were overlapping. So, the sense of failure that I was feeling as a mother, I was also feeling as an artist. And so at a certain point there, we decided, we got pregnant for the last time, and my husband and I agreed, like, this is it. If this doesn't go, we're done. It was just too hard. I was just sick all the time, and I had some bleeding events. I mean, it was just, all the experiences. If anybody needs advice on how to have a miscarriage, I can help you.
Oh my goodness.
Just a horrible thing to know a lot about,
sure.
But I do know all about it. So at that point, I decided to quit trying to have another child. And also I kind of dialed it in for art. Like I knew I was a creative person, but I thought this just isn't for me. And I don't know what I'm going to do. I knew I'd be creative in some measure, but I just thought that I'm not getting anywhere here. I don't want to try to be a professional artist, but at the same time, I pulled out my watercolors, which in my, especially my educational life as an artist, watercolors were not highly esteemed by the art community. So watercolors were kind of considered like a beginner's medium or a lady's medium. I mean, there's so much sexism in what is and what is not considered fine art that, it kind of, that could be a whole other podcast that we could talk about. But
oh, you mean lady paint?
Lady craft,
Yes.
textiles. There's lots of things that, quote, women do that never really made it to the canon or the art books, But like I said, that could be a whole other podcast.
Yes, that's interesting,
so I won't go down that rabbit trail. Yeah. So watercolor was in that camp, of like the kind of cheesy paintings of sailboats in your hotel room, that sort of thing, And, but what I liked about it, especially because I had a toddler at the time, is that it was like, no muss, no fuss. I could just pull out my little tiny palette and had paper and water, and that's all it took. And then I just started painting shapes, which is different than my previous work. I would just paint hexagons, or I'd paint stripes, or I'd paint repeating patterns. And then I liked color, but I didn't have like the creative energy to think about color palettes really. So I just stuck to the spectrum. Like I thought, well, the palette, my little watercolor palette here is arranged in a rainbow rainbow pattern. I guess I'll just paint rainbows. So I started painting these rainbow hexagons or rainbow stripes, and it was like taking a drug. It was almost like a pharmacological effect on my brain, where when I would start to paint these just repeating shapes, I would just drop out. I would just be so zoned in to this meditative, repetitive process that everything would drop away. The pain would drop, physical pain would drop away, mental pain would drop away. I would feel like myself again. I would feel like, oh my gosh, I'm back to myself somehow, just working with these colors. And the simpler the task was, the easier I could get there. And it was so essential during those, it's probably 2 years of really grinding grief. And I needed that simple art process to just pull me through. It was like taking a Valium or something. It had that kind of effect where it like kept me connected and tethered and gave me relief and made me feel present with myself. And it gave me like a little break from all the pain that I was experiencing.
Wow, that's really incredible. And I love that you found that. When you started with the watercolors, I'm curious, did you expect this, or what was your original plan with pulling out the watercolors? Did you have one?
I think it was, I think I was just a doodler kind of. I don't know if that's the right term, but it was like I had my whole life I've had a super consistent studio practice. So I think I'd always been getting into this flow state, but I didn't need it until my baby died. Like the flow state was always pleasurable, but when I had those, just devastating losses, then it was like, oh, it's the only thing that will keep me together. Like I absolutely have to do it. I had a friend who had a terrible loss, and somebody told her that she should craft. And she was like so offended because it sounds so trite.
Yeah.
It's like, what do you mean craft? Like, what are you talking about? And I don't know if crafting is the key, but I do think that there's something about this whole thing about flow, which, is actually like a scientific study. I dug into it pretty deep. Being a curious person, I, probably ran across some articles, and then I really was like, oh my gosh, this is happening to me. I want to know everything about it, because there's changes in your brain. There's the prefrontal cortex, which is in charge of, kind of ego driven. It's aware of your social standing, and it's aware of lists and rules. And I like to think of it as the strict librarian. So she's just there to keep us on task. We need the prefrontal cortex. It's very important for like humaning.
Functioning. Yeah.
Yes. Yep. Super essential to be a functioning human. If you damage your prefrontal cortex, which of course happens a lot because it's right in the front of our heads. But during flow, when you experience this deep concentration, during flow, the prefrontal cortex goes dark. It turns off. So there's no The strict librarian goes to sleep, and for me, it was like a loss of ego. You know, it was like I was no longer aware of all of these other swirling things that were happening in my life because I was so involved in hexagon, next hexagon, next hexagon. You know, like it's a simple thing. It doesn't take a lot of difficulty to get there. And, you know, as I've been studying flow, there's really no, there's as much variety in flow as there is in human experience. So the athletes get flow. There's group flow, especially in music. There's, you know, people get flow with cooking. People get flow with jogging. People get flow with cleaning their kitchen floor. You know, like there's all sorts of things that will get us there. And when I talk about it, people are nodding. They're like, oh, yeah, like, that's right. And then one of the common signs that you've been in flow is that you lose track of time. So, you know, 4 hours goes by in a flash and suddenly you're like, oh, what just happened? It's like 2 a.m. and I'm exhausted and or I'm starving and I have to pee, you know, like this is what happens, you know, when you pop out of flow. Because your brain just, when you are able to like drop into that very intense concentration, your brain can only take in so many bites of information. So then things like your neck being sore, there's just no room for it, you know, or you're going through a divorce and you're, you know, like trying to solve custody things. It goes away, you know, like it's an amazing thing. All the things that are happening to you just melt off just because your brain doesn't have the capacity for it. So it was really, you know, pretty important during that grief and trauma stage of my life.
I think it's so interesting to think about your career as an artist before that too, because like there's probably parallels everywhere, right? But like your process became very simplified, but also the situation of you creating art itself was simplified. You weren't creating art for a gallery or to try and sell or to, you know, sort of fill any specific criteria or work within a collection you were creating or anything. You were just like doing something and doing something simple. And I think that's so interesting because obviously, like the way you're describing it, flow is such a present moment experience, right? And all those things you were just talking about that fall to the background, most of that is, you know, it's a physical, like maybe we can filter out with flow, like a physical experience of pain, because that's just not the most relevant thing because we're so concentrated. But almost everything else is probably future oriented or past oriented, right? Like you don't have the chance while you're in flow to think about your plans or what's going to happen in the future or what somebody thinks of you or anything, because that's not happening right now. What's happening right now is the flow. Yeah,
because anxiety is rooted in the future and regret is rooted in the past, and there's no room for either of those things. It's interesting because there's a couple, like, you know, to get into flow, there's a couple of markers, and one is that you have to have a little bit of challenge, but not too much challenge. And they've actually, like, there's been studies that they actually quantify the level of challenge that you need to have to get into flow. And it's really brilliant because, you know, if you're at 0% challenge, which would be like watching TV or staring at the wall, you'll just be bored. There's no flow there. You know, you can zone out with TV, but zoning out or going with the flow is not the same as being in flow, because there's a certain amount of deliberate, electing to be deliberately focused on a task as opposed to just passively taking information from YouTube or whatever. So so then there's a bunch of things that are just passive, no flow. And then there's things that would be, you know, really challenging. If I was downhill skiing, which I've never done, I would likely not get into flow because I'd think I was going to die. You know, like it would be way too hard. Or picking up a violin, which I've never done. I would need a lot of help just to know how to hold it. And, I wouldn't get into flow for a while. I'd have to practice for a while to figure out how to get flow with that. And so when I ask people, what do you think is the target? Like, what's the happy percentage of difficulty? A lot of times they're like, 50, like right in between, or 75 or even 25. And it turns out it's 4.
Wow.
4%. 4% difficulty is what you want to target. And so then I think that people usually bite off more than they can chew, especially when it comes to, pursuing maybe a creative interest. Somebody wants to start painting or start sculpting or start ice skating. It applies to a lot of different things. And they jump in, they see someone doing it and they think, well, that looks easy. And then they start trying to do it and it's not easy. And then they get frustrated and you absolutely can't get into flow when it's too hard, because you're in this constant state of judgment, and the prefrontal cortex is in charge of judgment. And the prefrontal cortex is very conservative. It doesn't want you to do anything weird, it's like, the prefrontal cortex, our librarian, is saying, listen, there are rules and we've been following them and it's been working pretty good. And we don't want to mess up. We don't want to rock the boat. And what you're doing right now, painting with watercolors, is like way outside and you are not good at this. And furthermore, that other person is so much better than you are. And so then comparison and perfectionism is rooted in the prefrontal cortex and will keep us out of flow. So therefore, that's another reason why you need to start easy, because everybody, every healthy, able-bodied person can paint a hexagon or paint a stripe, it's something that everybody can do. You did it when you were a kid, so if you start there and then just are there for the process and the tactile nature of the moment of what it feels like to the color and the brush. And of course, again, this applies to so many different things like jogging, or being, even in like a work environment where, a lot of people can get into flow in a group problem solving session. There's lots of different ways to do it. But it has to stay simple. And I think that what happened to me when I quit, quote, quit being an artist, is that I was just like, I don't effing care what people think. I don't care if my work is relevant or interesting to, some critical eye that's going to be looking at it later, or will be the right fit for a grant or an exhibition, or will look good on my resume. It doesn't matter, because I'm just doing it to survive. I don't care if anybody ever sees it. It's just not important to me at all. So it took there's a little bit of a Phoenix situation there, because I had to burn out. I had to burn out and then just be like, yeah, I don't care what happens here. Like I've given up on my career, and now I'm just going to make the art that I want to make. So then, the funny things that happen, I had a couple hundred Instagram followers, and I thought, well, what would happen if I just filmed this? I'm not a filmmaker at all, but I thought, well, I'll just, I had a video function on my camera. And so I just recorded, a 40-minute painting, and then I turned it into a time lapse and I posted it on Instagram, fully expecting I'd get, 37 views. And it went viral. It got 20,000 views. And that was like weird. I was like, what's that all about? So then I posted another one the next day, and the same thing happened. And so then I just started posting them every day. So now 3 years later, I have posted more than 1,000 of those time-lapse videos, which are just my daily practice. And I've had, now I have millions of followers, and I have more than 1 billion views. I've sort of stopped counting, because really, what's the point after 1 billion?
That's what McDonald's said too. They're just like billions and billions. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. Let's just give up.
Wow, that's incredible. So even from the very first video, you saw traction immediately.
Yeah, it was very, very fast.
But unexpected, it sounds like.
Yep. And I think it was kind of a sweet spot. It was like Instagram had just allowed for video on their platform, because it had, just been a photography app. And then they were like, oh, okay, you can do, 60-second videos. And then they, whenever they roll out a new thing, they always sort of promote the people who are doing it. So then I just rose higher in the explore feed or whatever. And and now of course it doesn't matter at all. Doing video or photos, it just doesn't, it doesn't have any relevance to Instagram, but at the time it was like, there was just a number of things that all came together. It was also right after the 2016 election. And that was such a nuts time for our country, I think. I'm American. I assume you guys are American. Yeah. You could be Canadian. I don't know. And it was, maybe globally, there's a lot of stuff happening right now, lots of polarization. And I think that my videos were predictable.
And soothing.
So people could have like a mini flow watching me paint rainbows of hexagons. And it gave them like some stability in a crazy world, in a crazy news cycle. There was nothing controversial about it, and it was, you knew, oh, the orange is coming next. Ooh, the yellow is coming next. Oh, the green is coming next. But then, there'd be little mini, tiny surprises there. So people would almost get into like a mini flow by watching my videos, which was really a fascinating thing. And then something that I, now I've sort of reframed my calling or my role in the world, because one of the most satisfying things that I hear is people also, besides having like, they have my videos are like a soporific. They act as like an anxiety reducer for folks, but they also are an invitation to pursue their own creative calling in a really non-threatening way. Because, like I said, everybody can paint a stripe, everybody can just play, and it doesn't have to be something. It doesn't have to look like a bird, or your face or whatever, and which is, it just dials up the challenge a lot if that's your goal. So I like dial the challenge down, and then people are like, oh, I could do this. It doesn't have to be so complex. And so that's very exciting and rewarding for me, that people are pursuing their own creativity, just being inspired by my work.
I love that so much. One of our very central core messages here is that everybody is creative. And, a lot of people just misunderstand what that means, honestly.
Yes. Yeah.
And, so I was wondering if you had gotten any pushback to that. Like, because when I found you, you had that on your profile. It was one of the things. I had seen a piece of yours in the Minneapolis airport, cool. And it really spoke to me. And so I would like immediately got on your Instagram, and I was like, wow, this is incredible. But that immediately, of course, hopped out to me because it said something to that effect, as everyone is creative or something like that. So do you get much feedback about that or pushback, or is it mostly people feeling excited to jump in like you're saying? Well,
what I do, because now I've had so many millions of views, anytime you have any kind of profile on the internet, you do win some of the trolls and the haters. They will find you. Boy. They will find you, and they are very free to express their opinions. And, I like I said, I really don't feel like what I'm doing is in any way controversial, but there's plenty of people that think it is very shocking and scandalous and definitely not art, and I'm wasting paint and I'm doing it wrong,
Wasting paint.
I get a lot of those at different, at different seasons, like that type of commenter will show up, and I really, really enjoy it. I really, really, really like that conversation about like what is or what is not art. What does it mean to waste paint?
Yeah.
I love that. I really, really love that, because of course, pursuing a creative calling, even if it's as a hobby, is the nature of that is to waste paint, because failure is the rubble of failure is what we build our voice on. We need to have wasted paint that maybe goes straight to the garbage to become, more individual and more unique in our expression. It's just absolutely essential. And that again, the prefrontal cortex is the one that's saying, no, you have to use this scarcity, you have to use the smallest possible amount of paint because it's valuable and it's expensive. And that could be also, the voice of authority figures when we were kids, like telling us to not, waste whatever and be conservative and, but then the prefrontal cortex is right there too. And so, I think that the haters are revelatory to me, because not only are they, funny and, frankly, pretty ignorant, but they're also, they say what is in a lot of our heads. They are the ones that are giving, the voice or embodiment to our prefrontal cortex, like you're doing it wrong, you're wasting time, you're wasting materials. Why are you even doing this? There's no money in the arts. You can't make a living. There's a bathroom to be cleaned somewhere. There's a kid to be fed, like there's so many more things that are so practical, or, like you should be volunteering at the homeless shelter, not like spending all your time in this luxurious, painting pleasure, because it just doesn't generate anything for the world. I mean, those are some of the voices that happen. Wow. And I really think, one of the things I've been thinking about a lot lately, just because I talk to a lot of folks that are trying to like find their way in their creative calling. One of the things that I think is kind of important is like, you got to throw elbows to make a space for your destiny, and even if it's just, I paint on Saturdays, or I practice my guitar a couple times a week, or, these different things that we do, it's like, they are absolutely essential for our mental health, and it can, with enough time and practice, it can turn into a voice that needs to be heard in the world. So both of those things are true. And the only way that that's going to happen is if we make it happen for ourselves. And especially, women, I think, this probably applies to men too, but like moms, moms are the ones that are, there's always something that can be done in their house with their kids, like, and then moms with jobs, like, full-time jobs and other, categories, like, oh my gosh, it's like, it is so hard to carve out those hours, and there's so much guilt associated with it that, there, and since we're on since I'm on the doing, the Doing Scary Things podcast, I think it can feel scary to say, I'm giving myself this 2 hours, I'm hiring a babysitter, or I'm not cleaning the bathroom, and I'm not making muffins, healthy
brand
spelts and flaxseed muffins, and I'm going to spend 2 hours to paint something that I might throw away. Like that is scary stuff right there,
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing all that. I was getting a little emotional when you were talking about the wasted paint, because it's so true. That is what our inner critics tell us, and also, there's tons of research of children being discouraged specifically from pursuing, creative crafts. And it is that mentality. It's that, well, you probably won't be the best, so why would you try? Or you might fail. So let's not even, bother. There's so much to be learned from failing and from that process.
Also, like, who is so concerned about the global supply of paint? Like, is this really an issue? I can't believe that that's like a real argument. Like, it's a resource.
It's my paint. Exactly. I bought it. Like, I don't know why,
I frankly want to know what they're doing with their time,
or their
and
paint.
How many hours they volunteer weekly.
Right. Or how much McDonald's packaging they throw away, or how much, it's like, I don't really know what, this ecology around paint. I don't really understand it. It's like, it's so strange. It's such a strange thing that comes
clearly
up.
Their inner librarians are working overtime. Like, they're trying to pick up extra hours in your brain, or like in your life, and whatever, that's their own thing. But I have a question about yours.
Yes.
The phrase trust the process keeps coming to my mind, because I think what the prefrontal cortex does and what the inner librarian does, I love that so much as a metaphor, by the way. What they do is manage the process, which is basically the opposite of trusting the process, right? They're controlling the process and dictating the process and streamlining the process and giving you the steps for the process. And so you have found flow through not managing the process, but trusting it and experiencing it. But now, like you said, you've kind of like shifted in your life to kind of, helping other people, and you're not only doing your daily art practice. So I'm wondering if you have given your inner librarian some good things to manage now that are kind of peripheral to how this all started. Like, has she got some productive things to do for you now around this?
Yeah. Well, I'm not a hater of the inner librarian. Right. It's kind of like we learn how to drive and we have to take the driver's test, and our inner librarian is in charge of that, like memorizing the ground rules. Any culture runs on moral codes, and if we didn't have them, any like agreed moral codes, if we didn't have those agreed moral codes, things would totally fall apart. And the inner librarian is in charge of like, yeah, you don't touch someone's butt in public,
Thank you.
Right. Yeah. Like that's, or, there's any number of things, or you don't crash into the stop sign, or you don't, like you avoid these, there's rules that you have. And, it's funny because one of the traits of people who have a prefrontal cortex injury do things unacceptable social behaviors, like touching people inappropriate in public, and it's like because their inner librarian is not there to hold them back, so we need that. We absolutely need it. We need it for high level planning and thinking and reasoning. It's also called the executive. So our prefrontal cortex. So I'm not a hater. It's kind of like, people are like, smash fear in the face. And I'm like, well, fear. Yeah. Like, fear just doesn't get to drive. Elizabeth Gilbert wrote that in one of her books. Like fear is cool. We love Elizabeth Gilbert. Fear is fine. It can sit in the back seat. Like it's there to keep us safe. And there's a lot of important things about fear. Maybe that's not the best word, but just like caution and awareness. And we can't just plunge off into the world. And, so then the librarian, and the librarian, I think, is on. Really, there's been studies on this too. Like people can't really maintain flow for more than a couple of hours. And then maybe like 4 is sort of the optimal time,
Because we have to pee.
Right. Well, we have to pee. And it's like, it takes the level of concentration. It's kind of like, it seems like it's finite. And then the inner librarian comes back and, it's like, oh yeah, I got to plan for groceries and I got to, I've got to run my life. And, so there's a relationship there. And I also think, Ernest Hemingway was credited. I don't know if he actually said this, but he was credited for saying, write drunk, edit sober. Yes. And alcohol, by the way, turns off the prefrontal cortex, as well as some different kinds of drugs, like marijuana will do that and a few other ones. And so, him saying write drunk, edit sober was kind of like write in flow and then edit with the librarian on deck. So then that's kind of like, I'll make the work and not be making judgments about it and not be deciding if it's good or bad. And then in the cold light of the librarian, like make decisions, about like, oh, okay, what did I actually do here? That's the critical side of me. That's good. We want it too, So yes.
Awesome.
No, that's brilliant. Yeah. It literally is different parts of your brain. We were talking with a writer about that. Anything to turn off that editing part of your brain is so helpful.
It's good to know, though, that you don't have to use substances to do that. If you can find a way to flow, right, then your brain will do it for you.
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting to me that a lot of, creative types, people that are in the arts, there's like kind of a persistent trope that they tend towards more addictive behaviors. And I wonder, someone like Kurt Cobain, with a, real troubled addiction history, and you can name lots of other artists and musicians in that category. And I wonder if it's like they were just going after flow at any cost, like they're trying to find it one way or the other. And it was, just like essential to their well-being. And then it happened that, drugs got them there too. And, that tends to spiral pretty rapidly depending on, certain elements.
That's a very interesting hypothesis.
There's been a lot of writing about the addictive nature of flow because besides it's pleasurable, so it's this it's this concentrated sense with pleasure and autonomy. There's a huge chemical cocktail that's released in the brain of, dopamine and all the things. And a lot of people talk about the fact that it can be addictive. So especially with like adventure sports athletes that are doing cliff jumping or whatever crazy things that they do, in order to get flow, they have to do more and more dangerous things, more and more crazy things. And then it's legitimately dangerous because they're going after flow, but they're doing really dangerous things to get there. So that's an interesting, like, kind of the dark side of flow when, maybe you have an addictive personality to start with, and then, you end up, kind of pursuing something that might not be, or, there is a limit to how much I can paint hexagons in a day when I really do have a life and a body and a family and, and emails. So,
an inbox. In your experience personally, are there other, do you think there's kind of a limit to the number of activities or whatever that one person can find flow in?
No, I don't think there's a limit. I think that there is personality involved. So everybody has different flow triggers. And I think it's a really interesting investigation. I think that probably don't have time to go into it, but I have this whole thing about this flow pyramid. Like on the lower level, the biggest base of the flow pyramid is personal flow, which would be like walking or gardening or meditating, like things that are really just for you and maybe would extend to your immediate family or something. And then the next level up would be skill acquisition flow, where you're like, I think I'm going to learn the guitar. And then you have to practice, and then you get into flow when you're practicing. And then there's creative flow, which once you get good enough at the guitar, you might start to be able to write your own music and bring your own flair, and those two things there's no rule that says you have to get really good at the guitar before you start to add your own creative, elements to the guitar. So those things are kind of reciprocal sometimes. But there is like a onboarding, with chess. I don't play chess. I think you can get into flow with chess. I've talked to a lot of people that do, but it would take me a while to be able to get into flow, and then another long while to just learn the game before I could start to add my own creative, ideas to the game,
To a certain extent, right? When you're building a skill, the librarian's part of that process, and we can't kick her out the door yet because we don't exactly have it.
Yeah. Well, onboarding and deliberate practice. Yeah, deliberate practice is more than 4%. So if somebody handed me a violin, I need help. Something like if I just picked up a violin on, off my couch and tried to play it, I wouldn't know what to do. So I would need an expert, either a YouTube video or an instructor, to show me, like, this is how you hold the bow and this is the shoulder you hold the violin on. It would feel really weird. It'd be far more than 4% difficulty. And then I would have to practice to get myself into a place where I could get into flow. So that the librarian is in charge of that. Like, she'd be the one that would be disciplining me to practice just so I can get into flow. So that deliberate practice is very important. And I think there's actually like many phases of deliberate practice, because after a while I get tired of painting hexagons and I'm like, oh, I want to maybe paint triangles now, and then there's maybe a little bit of a deliberate practice where I'm like kind of determining what I want to do before I can get back to the flow state. And so anyway, it's the skill acquisition, and then the creative flow, and then the very tippy top, which isn't for everybody. And it takes, a certain maybe personality to get there, but that's participatory flow. So that's when you exercise these are the people whose concerts you go to. So they're in flow and you're there to experience the flow that they are offering. Or you go to a museum and there's beautiful paintings and beautiful artwork that the audience is participating in. And when it's very good, then that means people have like a ancillary flow experience, like I've gone to, live music like that, where it's like I get into the zone and I'm just the watcher, I'm not like, and sometimes even with like really good film or cinema, that really the story really captures me. I start to be in there with the story in a flow sense that's advanced past just passively watching TV. So that I think is really a beautiful part of flow.
You could call it overflow.
So good.
You can have it, Josie. You can have it.
Oh my God. Don't encourage her, Josie. Don't encourage her.
I just had to say the one thing. I'm sorry.
I'm just kidding. That's so good.
Oh, so good.
No, that's fascinating. One thing I wanted to ask you about, Josie, it seems by looking at all of your social media presence, and you just put out a ton of content, as you mentioned, it seems that you're also very giving to the people who follow you. So you're creating a lot of things, you're helping, you're teaching. Tell us a little bit about that and anything you have coming up in that regard.
I am like an evangelist of flow. And if everybody got into flow an hour a day, I think the world would change.
100%.
Everything would be different. Everything would be different if everybody found their thing and then practiced it. And so I love also when I'm talking about flow and I see a light go off and I know that they are recognizing the flow in their life. I know that they're like, oh, like that's what happens when I, whatever. Mm-hmm. And that's like so satisfying for me. And, I have a, free 21-day email course that I'd love to offer to your listeners. And I can give you the link later, but it's just my website, josielewis.com/promo. And then there's a sign up form right in there. And then they can just start getting the emails right away.
Oh, that's so cool. Thank you. Yeah. And I would love to check that out as well. What would we usually ask this at the end, and I want to make it a little bit more specific this time. For anyone who hasn't experienced flow or who is like listening to this and like maybe like what you said, it's like the busy mom who can't imagine 5 minutes to themselves. What would be your advice as a way to start?
I think that it's really important for our mental health and the world at large, and those two things are definitely connected. I think it's really important for us to make it a deliberate practice. Like, we know we should go to the gym or eat healthy because it's like good for our bodies. And I think it would behoove us if we also had that same regard for getting into flow, because it has the same mental health benefits as, working out has for our bodies. And so then I think it's just one of those things that maybe because it feels so good, like going to the gym, you have to suffer
every time, every time.
But it's like, I'm suffering, but I know I have to. And so then somehow that makes it easier for us to do it. But it makes it easy. Like, well, I could suffer by cleaning the bathroom, or I could suffer by going to the gym. I guess I also need to go to the gym. But for some reason, because flow is so pleasurable, we don't give ourselves that gift. But it's so essential. And then the other thing that I hear a lot, and I always feel like it should be obvious, but it's like distractions in the form of our phones and really our phones are the main thing. But we don't give ourselves that. For most people, it takes at least a half an hour to get into flow. So you have to have a half an hour of concentrating and maybe even disciplining yourself to concentrate on something before you can cross over that, whatever the neurological barrier is to get into that flow state. And so it's like A, giving yourself the permission, and B, giving yourself the discipline. And it's both of those things are a requirement.
That's so cool. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, that is so cool. I'm thinking about my own to-do list on some days, like the days that I actually have time to do deep work. Sometimes I arrive on those days and I have a loose plan, or I have options, right? Like, oh, I could work on this writing project, or I could work on programming some music, or whatever it may be. But sometimes I get there and I'm like, I don't feel like doing this right now. But I think that happens to a lot of people. So I'm pointing this out for everyone's benefit. But that's really encouraging to think, okay, but I know that if I give myself maybe 30 minutes to an hour to just go after it, like, then if I get in flow, great. And if not, then I give myself permission to switch gears, you know? Having some kind of a time frame
for sure.
on that, to me personally, that's super helpful to know that, like, it won't be a waste of time to invest this 30 plus minutes to see if I'm going to get there today or not.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And you know, I don't know if what you're describing there exactly was procrastination. I'm not, you know, but a lot of people do talk about you know, I've been wanting to, you know, break out my new colored pencils, but I don't know, I just, you know, and I just don't do it, or it never seems like the time is right, or these different things are happening. And procrastination is a function of fear.
Right.
You know, ultimately. So the procrastination is like a kind of like fear light, where it's not like, oh my gosh, I'm terrified of colored pencils, but that's what it is. You know, like that's what it is, because the prefrontal cortex is like, I don't know what's going to happen when you when you open up that box. You know, like it could go very poorly, Josie. You could be made a complete fool of, and you do not have time for these shenanigans. So don't even do it. Don't even think about it. Leave them alone. Leave them in the drawer.
You have a reputation to protect, Josie.
Yes, exactly.
I think what I'm describing is like the step one response, or the step one attempt to prevent procrastination. Like for me, if I plan those blocks of time in advance, then I can't have the excuse that I don't have time, you know? But from experience of doing that, I've learned that some days, to my dismay, I show up to those scheduled blocks of time and I'm like, I don't feel like doing this right now. So that's another opportunity to procrastinate. But I think what I try to get myself to do is like at least try, even if I don't feel like it. And then usually the feeling follows, you know? But having that time frame of like, how long should I try is helpful.
Yeah, I really like the time frame too, because like what you're talking about, Anna, and I know, you know, we've gone through a million different scenarios between ourselves, but like if I say, okay, Wednesday is my day for blank, like that's so overwhelming to feel like I have 8 hours to do something. And then I do get into like, I'm going to do this first, or this, you know, it's just like all the weird ways your brain plays tricks on you, I think. And probably some procrastination thrown in. So I really like the idea of like, let's give it 30 minutes.
Get into flow first. Yeah.
Yeah. That's fascinating. And then like Josie said, like, there's probably a cap too, you know, like I shouldn't be surprised if after 4 hours something's changing.
There's a cap. And you know, the resistance is real, you know, the resistance that keeps us from our creative work is alive and well. And it comes out in a lot of different forms. You know, it's
trolls.
There's a wonderful book called The War of Art by Steven Pressfield, which it's like kind of my Bible. I have it next to my bed. It's like my favorite. Oh, it's so good. It's a slim little book. It's not long. It's very readable. But he talks about the resistance to, he doesn't talk about flow as much, but he talks about the resistance to creative work and how you know, he almost embodies it. You know, it's kind of like this demonic presence that is after us and not wanting us to play our violin, you know, and it comes and it plays out in so many different ways to so many different people, but it's the real deal for sure. So we're all faced with that, including me, all the time, you know.
I was going to say, I think we've already covered it though, but I was going to just ask if there's any specific things you've found that helps with resistance specifically. Is it different than the flow?
Yeah, I mean, in talking to a lot of my people around visual arts, so that's, you know, kind of a specific microcosm, but I think it would work for writing and music and a number of other things. Something that can really help, it's like a super practical functional thing, is to have a space that's dedicated to your thing. You know, so even, you know, for instance, I like write and meditate in the morning in one particular spot in my house. It's like the only time I ever sit in that chair is in the morning when I'm writing and meditating and I have my coffee, and it's this really special time. And it's almost like I habit stack, so everything is dialed into those 2 hours before my daughter gets up and before the day starts, because I really value that time. And so then, because I've been doing it for years and years and years, it's like, it's very easy to do it, to keep doing it. It's like, this is just what I do. I spend these 2 hours doing this thing in the dark, before everybody else gets up. And, with art, this happens to me a lot, I'll have, because I work with so many different mediums. If I have my acrylic stuff out, but I suddenly have an idea for a watercolor painting or, a drawing or something, I'm like, oh, but I gotta reset up the whole studio so I can do it, and so, I have a studio. A lot of people don't even have a regular spot, which is fine if you need to use your kitchen table. But then have a box that's super easy, like that you can pull that box out and it's right there and everything's there and you don't need to dig around for your materials, because then just offering yourself that physical manifestation of your internal desire makes everything easier to get there. Because if you're like, well, okay, I want to write, but it's too loud in my house and my laptop is, I don't know, it's not really working. And what coffee shop should I go to? And you just never get there because all that stuff acts as resistance and it will prevent the flow.
That's brilliant.
Josie, what creative risks are you taking right now?
Probably about a year ago, I felt pretty strongly that I needed to start putting my face on the internet.
Scary.
Which, my hands have been seen by billions, but my face, on the other hand, and I actually really enjoy public speaking. And that's, something I get into flow for sure. Like I kind of black out. It's really weird. I can't, I'll start public speaking and then it feels good at the time. And then afterwards I can't remember a thing.
I have experienced
did
that.
I even make any points? I don't know. So luckily a lot of times they're recorded and then I can watch them. But I did not have that experience of flow standing alone in my studio in front of my camera. Like that was very hard. It was a real challenge. And I felt really strongly that it was important I'm not sure, maybe it's like my calling, because I feel like I very naturally want to kind of take a teacher role, teacher / evangelist / prophet. I'm not sure what to call me, but I know that I want to speak to people, like I want to connect with them. And that's really, it feels really good for me to do that. So then the challenge was put yourself on video and then record these videos where I'm talking about things I'm thinking about and things that I think are important around art and creativity. And it's hard. It's real hard, and it's like a little bit of a pivot, especially with Instagram, for so long it had just been art videos. And then I started popping in these, hey, it's me. Like, hi, what's up? I wanted to talk about creative blocks or flow or whatever. And it's like a bit of a pivot for my audience. And it's like, oh my gosh, people unfollow me. And,
really?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
I was going to ask that because, and we don't have to talk about social media strategy. It's so frustrating, but people will say that, right? It's like if you give people one thing, it's like, that's what they're there for. That's what they want. And so like, what happens when you change, So what was that experience like? I mean, you've already shared that you love you laugh at the haters, which I think is great.
Yes.
But were you able to kind of take that in stride once you started sharing? Did it get any easier or was that pretty brutal?
It is getting easier. And, the thing that I'm thinking about a lot these days is, especially in this very loud marketplace of the internet, there's a lot of voices, and there's a lot of overlapping voices, that are talking about very similar things. Mm-hmm. And the thing that I've been thinking about that, just in my own experience, because I do a lot of research and I, will follow, especially in the business arena, I'll follow different voices like, Marie Forleo and, these like kind of giants. And there's some people that are very well known and they have perfectly good information, but they don't speak my language. It's like, it just doesn't connect with me, but then someone like Elizabeth Gilbert or Marie Forleo really does. And so what I've been realizing, and this has been liberating for me, is that the people who connect with me are very individual and specific. And there's plenty of people that won't. But that's okay, because I just want to connect with the people whose language I'm speaking.
Right. Yeah.
Like, it doesn't have to be all the people, it just is like, there's something very particular, just not just in my information, but in my manner of speaking and in my sense of humor and my delivery and all of that is like, there's going to be some people, I can't imagine who, but there are going to be some people who aren't into me.
Right?
And it's like, what? I don't
You're
understand.
not into flow prophet
they
Josie
aren't.
Lewis? I'm sorry.
I'm so offended.
Right. And then I don't think, we should be afraid of polarizing content. We shouldn't be afraid of people that don't like what we have to say or are full on, fully disagreeing or even being, like maliciously commenting on our posts, because that just means we're sparking something, so for every person that doesn't like what we're doing, there are people that do. And so if we're trying to just be like everything to everybody, we won't really get anywhere, because I think it's the heart of individuality that will bring people to our message and to our world.
I think that's a great argument for why there's room for multiple people who do have overlapping messages, It's like,
Yes.
we're all here trying to reach our people, and there's not overlap in all of our people.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. And then it's also, like if I bought a business course, it's not going to be the only business course I ever buy.
Yeah.
Like, it's very likely I'll buy another one from somebody else, or I don't listen to just one business podcast, I listen to a lot of them, and I've signed up for a lot of mailing lists, and I buy products from a lot of different people. And, so there's so much overlap. It's not a poverty world, where it's like, there's only one, it can only be one at the top and everybody else, won't get anywhere. It's a much bigger world than that.
Yeah, I think that's beautifully said. Thank you for sharing that. On a personal note, and I wasn't going to bring this up, and you probably don't remember this, but when I found you online, I had actually just been to a social media conference, and it was all about that, about how like you're going to like turn some people away when you start being really honest and sharing things really important to you, but you're also going to, that's how you attract your people. And that was like the whole focus, right? And we've all probably heard that term. It was like, so I was like, okay, like I'm trying, I'm putting myself out there, and that can be really hard at times. So anyway, when I found your page, Josie, I remember just being so excited because again, it was like our central message, and it was like, yes, I believe this too. I believe everybody's creative. And I sent you this really long message, and then I started feeling really self-conscious of it. And I was like, I'm sorry, I hope you don't think I'm crazy. And your response to me was, you're not crazy, you're my people.
Ooh, all right.
And I was just so freaking excited because I had just been to that conference, and I was like, it works. Like, I can't believe it works. I can't believe that I'm connecting with people that, believe the same things. So anyway, thank you for that. And that was just really encouraging to me.
Oh, that's so cool. Way to go, Josie. Good job. Good job with the DMs.
Yes, past Josie.
The bane of my life. Yes.
Totally.
Thank you.
Totally. No. But I love it. But I think it is so true. Like, you have to put yourself out there and be willing to have critics in order to find people that you're going to connect with too.
Yep. Absolutely.
Thank you so much for sharing with us today. I just really appreciate everything.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us today on the
pleasure.
Doing Scary Things podcast. If you liked today's episode, please subscribe so you never miss one, leave a review, and share it with a friend. You can find our show notes and all kinds of other information at doingscarythings.com, as well as our new album, Whisper, under the band name Jasper and Jade. Until next time.
My vote is for Flow Prophet as your title.
Flow Prophet.
Yes.
Sounds great. I'll own that.
I mean,
I'll own it.
I've been thinking about it.
Trademark it.
Calling it in. Yeah.
Trademark it.
Flow prophet Josie Lewis is here with us today. Flowing, prophesying. It's good. I love it.
Yeah. Prophesying.
I love it.
Flow.
I'll take it. Flow is the best experience in life.
Yeah.
I'm convinced.